When making an ethical decision, it is important to consider the impact that various courses of action would have on the parties involved, the decision maker, those affected by the decision, and the ethical principles involved. In the case study, One Small Cut That Killed, a farmer sought treatment from a primary care provider for superficial cuts and a swollen ankle after falling in his chicken coop. The provider treated his ankle and sent him on his way. 3 days later, the farmer fell into septic shock from an infected cut and died in the ICU. The family wanted answers, and the provider's hospital pressured her to apologize to the family in order to avoid legal ramifications. The provider feared that apologizing and admitting error could make the situation worse, and she also worried about the opinions of her colleagues if she admitted to making a mistake. In thinking about this case study, I used guidelines provided on the WebGuru database regarding ethical decision-making. I considered the position of the provider who had made a mistake. In treating the farmer, she had neglected to consider the fact that the farmer's cuts could become infected with dangerous bacteria from the chicken coop and had not given him instructions for treating them at home and/or what to watch out for in order to prevent this fatality. Imagining myself in the position of the provider, I asked myself the following questions according to the guidelines for ethical decision-making. 1. What is the action or inaction that is the cause for concern? In this case, apologizing or not apologizing to the family is the cause for concern. Who or what may be affected? The family, the provider, and the hospital may all be affected by the action or inaction. 3. How will they be affected, i.e., what are the possible consequences? The family might be offered some comfort and closure by an apology, especially if the details of the case are explained and a sincere apology provided. In the best case scenario, the provider could also feel relief and closure, and no financial or PR consequence would befall the hospital. Another potential consequence is that the family might pursue legal action against the provider for negligence. This could harm the provider's career and financially impact the hospital in a negative way. 4. Are there any laws or regulations, written or unwritten, that may apply? I don't know of any written laws regarding the mistakes of providers and whether they need to apologize for them. If there are laws within the hospital system, then the provider is obligated to apologize by the ethical principle of fidelity to the institution. What actions might be taken, and what would the consequences of these actions be? The provider could apologize, and the consequences would either be positive for all involved or more negative for the provider and hospital than they currently are. The provider could refuse to apologize, and perhaps there would be no negative consequences for the provider and hospital, but the family would have no peace. But there is also a chance that the family would still pursue legal action, and therefore a negative impact would be felt by all parties involved. 6. Can anything be done to prevent this from recurring or to minimize the severity of the consequences? When a medical mistake occurs, the best course of action is to educate other members of the institution or team in order to prevent anyone else from making the same mistake. In medicine, we can all learn from our mistakes in order to protect each other and our future patients. In this case, I would argue that it is within the best interests of everyone involved for the provider to apologize to the family, admit error, and explain what had gone wrong. This would not only offer emotional relief to both the family and the provider, based on the ethical principles of justice and beneficence, but also research has shown that apologizing, expressing empathy, engaging in corrective action, and offering compensation after a medical error may improve the provider-patient relationship and may ultimately help reduce the total number of medical malpractice lawsuits. In this case, the hospital may end up paying a smaller compensation than what they would incur from the cost of a lawsuit and the resulting negative PR. In my opinion, the only downside to this course of action would be a bruise to the provider's ego from admitting an error in front of her colleagues. However, I would argue that ego protection is ultimately in the best interests of none of the parties involved, including the provider. By protecting her ego instead of apologizing to the family, she would lose the opportunity to ease her conscience, educate her colleagues who could make the same mistake, and provide comfort and closure to a family who is grieving. Apologizing is the only ethical course of action. Thank you.